Senator Cormann.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President. As a Liberal Senator for Western Australia, I support the Wheat Export Marketing Bill 2008 and what it sets out to achieve. I am pleased that the government has taken on board many of the issues and recommendations identified by the Senate inquiry into this bill. And of course, our leader, Dr Nelson, has flagged a small number of further amendments which we believe will improve the proposed system. This legislation will give wheat growers choice on how to market their wheat. The accreditation of multiple sellers will introduce competition among those who want to sell the growers' wheat on the export market, helping to ensure that growers get the best available price for their wheat. It will introduce competition and a greater level of transparency into supply chain arrangements, helping to put downward pressure on costs. And of course it will give growers certainty in terms of the arrangements that will apply to the export of their wheat from the 2008 harvest onwards. As policymakers, our overarching objective should be to achieve a legislative framework that enables wheat growers to maximise their returns. And the returns that actually matter to growers are not their gross returns, but their net returns. And I'm sure that all senators would appreciate that. The past arrangements have failed wheat growers in that regard. The current transitional arrangements are running out by the end of June, and they have to be replaced with something that is both workable, bankable, and will enable wheat growers to maximise their net returns. Unlike wheat growers on the eastern seaboard, wheat growers in my home state of Western Australia rely nearly exclusively on exports. 90% plus of the wheat grown in Western Australia is exported. In some years, Western Australia has made up almost all the export pool. South Australia is in a similar, if not quite such an extreme position. Growers on the east coast, of course, are able to benefit from the advantages of a deregulated market in their main market, the domestic market. In contrast, growers in Western Australia and South Australia under the past and the current systems were and are restricted in how they are allowed to market their wheat in what is their main market, the export market. As the main contributors to the national pool over many years, Western Australian wheat growers have carried a disproportionate proportion of the cost of the inherent inefficiencies and inequities in the single desk arrangements. The most recent iteration of the past system consisted in a publicly listed corporation controlling the single desk and the export of all wheat in the national pool. The system as it existed provided an inherent incentive for the corporation through its subsidiaries to maximise its return from the pool rather than to maximise the net return for the pool and ultimately growers. I'll just pick up on a few examples which have been covered in the 2007 Growers Report by the regulator of the Export Wheat Commission. The Export Wheat Commission, making an assessment of the freight charges that were applied to a sample of 39 vessels, found that exporting wheat growers would have been $14.5 million better off if independent brokers had been used and if the services had been tendered in the open market rather than to keep the freight services in-house through one of the AWB subsidiaries. Despite this concerning finding, the Export Wheat Commission to date has not made any further in-depth assessment, as far as I'm aware, of the additional costs carried by exporting wheat growers across all of the 733 vessels. Western Australian industry experts, however, estimate that the figure across all vessels is well in excess of $200 million. That is $200 million that comes off the net return for exporting wheat growers and went straight into the then AWB bottom line and into a combination of dividends to shareholders and performance bonuses for then AWB senior executives. The answers provided by the Export Wheat Commission during the Senate inquiry about AWB's hedging activities under the old system also point to an inherent flaw in the system. Again, the incentive to maximise returns from the pool for shareholders in direct conflict with the stated objective to ensure a maximum return for growers. To give a demonstration of that, I will read some extracts of an article that appeared in the West Australian on 20 April 2007. When facing criticism for not letting the share market and farmers know about the extent of the more than $360 million in losses it was facing on the futures market, its defence was that it was not material to its share price. that it was not material to its share price, that in effect it had no impact on its share price whatsoever. Why? And I quote the article, quote, "An AWB spokesman said potential future losses were borne by the pools and therefore growers, not the company. It is not material to AWB Limited and there was no need for disclosure." So if there is an upside, if there is a profit from futures trading, growers have to share it with AWB Limited and AWB Limited shareholders. But if things go wrong, the cost was carried by the pool in its entirety. I'm not even criticising AWB on this. They were operating in a flawed system. I'm criticising the system that facilitated this circumstance, a circumstance where AWB Limited was able to speculate on the futures market without facing the consequences of taking on excessive risk itself, instead while able to benefit from any gains as a result of taking on that risk. So the benefits of futures trading were shared between AWB Limited, its management and shareholders, and growers, whereas all losses were passed on to the pool and growers. How is that fair? Pursuing its shareholder best interest rather than the growers' best interest, of course AWB would do that if that's what they can lawfully do, protected by a statutory monopoly on wheat export marketing arrangements. However, as policymakers, we should not be continuing to endorse a system that allowed this to happen. There clearly is a great diversity of views among growers, as there is a diversity of views among those who want to preserve a single desk. I have considered all views and all of the arguments that came forward in the course of the Senate inquiry very carefully. Naturally, I approached the issue from the perspective of someone who believes in the benefits of a free market. On balance, I believe that the majority of wheat growers in my home state of Western Australia have come to the view that the days of the single desk, as it has existed in the past, are over. There is an anticipation now by many that they will be able to take advantage of the opportunities under this new system. And I'll just read out a couple of quotes for some wheat farmers from Western Australia that appeared before the Senate inquiry. Mr. Peacock, who is a 40-year-old farmer from the mid-west of Western Australia, and I quote, "I'm a fourth-generation wheat grower. I strongly support the legislation. As a young man coming into agriculture, probably one of the overwhelming sentiments that farmers talked about was that the big hustle of being a farmer is that you are a price taker. I believe that under the old legislation we were the ultimate price takers. We had no option to do anything else, to be entrepreneurial, to be a free marketer, or to find a way to value add. There was no incentive whatsoever to do that. I believe that under this legislation, for the first time in my life, and I did not believe I would see it in my lifetime, small growers like me have at last the opportunity to employ some of our entrepreneurial skills to try to come above the average. There is incentive now to do better than the average, to do more than just be a subsistence survivor." And Mr. Halbert, I am here in a private capacity. I'm a grain grower from Three Springs, which is 300 kilometres north of Perth. I am strongly in favour of this legislation. In WA, we have seen a cooperatively owned grain pool which held the single desk for barley, canola and lupins. The competition introduced when the Grains Licensing Authority were introduced, and they have even admitted this themselves, forced them to sharpen their pencils. Under legislated monopoly, there is no incentive for them to seek new markets or for them to reduce supply chain costs and general marketing costs. And even by those that have traditionally been opposed to deregulation of the single desk, there is an acceptance, albeit a reluctant one, that this new system of accrediting multiple sellers will become a reality from this harvest onwards, like the WA Farmers Federation. When indeed, they have already entered into and announced a commercial arrangement with the Emerald Group to offer a special pool to members of the WA Farmers Federation in anticipation of this bill becoming law. Even those that continue to support the single desk do not all support the same single desk. Talking to wheat growers in Western Australia, it is clear that some are talking about the statutory single desk that used to be underwritten by the Commonwealth Government. Others want to see the single desk and the right of veto to remain with the publicly listed AWB as a statutory monopoly. Others say we should keep the single desk arrangements with AWB with some adjustments. And others are simply worried about the unknown. And we should take those concerns quite seriously and continue to communicate with farmers that are worried about the impact of this legislation to ensure that they can take best possible advantage of the opportunities offered by this legislation. The reality is that with the end of the single desk, wheat export arrangements will move towards similar arrangements that apply to the domestic wheat industry, other grains and bagged and containerised wheat. And they will move towards the same deregulated system as operates for virtually every other commodity, including those that are often produced on the same wheat belt farms. Even the AWB, under its new management, is getting ready for the new world and embracing the system proposed under this legislation. And during the Senate inquiry, I referred a number of times to a press release put out by the AWB Managing Director Gordon Davis when he said, quote, "The proposed wheat export accreditation scheme provided the opportunity to introduce competition and choice with appropriate regulatory protections into wheat marketing and to lower the cost of AWB services to wheat growers." Now, some legitimate concerns were raised during the Senate inquiry, particularly regarding port access and the potential behaviour of the legacy monopolies held by CBH, GrainCorp and ABB over storage and handling infrastructure. It is very important that the system, however, be allowed to evolve commercially without being strangled by excessive regulations. I mean, I guess the point being here that we have to get the balance right. We do have to ensure that we take those concerns on board and find a way of responding to them and addressing them appropriately, but without, however, strangling any attempts to resolve and address some of these issues that are legacy issues commercially. And I believe that this legislation, once amended in line with the amendments floated by Dr. Nelson, will get the balance right. In my home state of Western Australia, CBH has made a good start with its Grain Express model, but like all participants in the market, CBH will need to act honestly and commercially if it is to retain the goodwill of growers. In conclusion, I mean, as I mentioned in my introduction, this legislation will give wheat growers choice on how to market their wheat. It will introduce competition among those who want to sell the growers' wheat on the export market, helping to ensure growers get the best available price for their wheat. It will introduce competition and a greater level of transparency into the supply chain arrangements, helping to put down pressure on costs, and it will give growers certainty in terms of the arrangements that will apply to the export of their wheat from the 2008 harvest onwards. Most importantly of all, it offers a better system to wheat growers aiming to maximise their net returns, and as such I believe that it should be supported by all. In closing, I would like to congratulate the Pastoralists and Grazers Association in Western Australia for having pursued this issue with great rigour and integrity for some time, and I would also like to congratulate my West Australian colleagues, Wilson Tuckey, the member for O'Connor, and my Senate colleague Senator Judith Adams for their tireless efforts in helping to bring about the change that we are debating today. Wheat growers across Australia, and particularly in our home state of Western Australia, will be better off as a result of their persistent efforts over a long period of time.